Hey, Garland Nixon here. We're hanging out with the one and only Mark Sleboda, and we got a number of important things to talk about. Let's talk. Hello, Garland Nixon here with Mark Sleboda. Before we get going, don't forget you can find Mark Sleboda at Boosty. That's boosty.to. You can follow him with all of his good works. And we're up to 175 subscribers. We're getting close to 200. So hopefully next week we will be at 200 subscribers. Things are going up fast. And as you can see, all of Mark's stuff, what's happening with him, community weekly question and answer, taking your questions, all kinds of great stuff for members and subscribers. So follow Mark Sleboda today. If you are able to donate, make sure you donate and you can keep up with all of Mark's stuff. All right, let's get going, Mark Sleboda. There's so many things to talk about. I'm just going to start with a random one. 1 week, the Ukrainians / EU are attacking the Druzhba pipeline, and the Hungarians or whoever are like, hey, you're attacking our pipelines and this is terrible. And then it's back on and they're attacking it. And it just seems to me that the Ukrainians don't attack that without Brussels saying, I mean, they're attack dogs. Hungary is not acting right. We want you to go make them suffer. Your thoughts on this whole Druzhba, on and off Druzhba attack line, pipeline attack stuff?
Yeah. So this is punishment for Hungary for not towing the line, for not going with the NATO Brussels consensus on Ukraine of attempts at having an independent foreign policy. And Hungary and Slovakia, and to a lesser extent several other Central European states, still get pipeline oil and gas from Russia. They basically said, well, we don't agree with what you're doing, and we're not going to sacrifice our energy security and pay 3 times as much or more for energy because of your proxy war on Russia in Ukraine. You know, we won't fight against it, and as long as we get exemptions from all of this, they have delayed things, but they have never, effectively stopped a single round of sanctions or military action. And it has to be said that even Hungary, they're doing things for Ukraine, right? They are providing food, humanitarian aid. They're providing electricity. 40% of Ukraine's electricity right now comes from Hungary, right? But that's not enough. That's not enough for Kiev, and that's not enough for Brussels and NATO. So to try to force Hungary to do without Russian energy, or to use that as leverage and blackmail against Hungary, support our EU ascension, or we will attack your energy security. That's literally what they're saying, right? For another country, right, that has not sacrificed part of its sovereignty and independence to the EU and to NATO, this would be an act of war on Hungary, right? Just
kind of like Nord Stream.
Yeah, it is like Nord Stream, except that the difference is the German ruling elite supported the attack on the pipeline because they were not the ones who, went about approving and having it installed. They were against it. So when they came to power, they were happy to be complicit in its destruction. The Hungarian government is not, right? They have been vocally against this conflict from the beginning. They wanted no part of it. They provided no arms. And Slovakia, since Robert Fico became the leader, it's the same thing. And they're both, their economies will definitively hurt without Russian energy. They'll be doing the same mad scramble and spiral to economic suicide and destruction that the rest of the EU is on, and they don't want it. They're already being dragged enough right down, as Germany goes, so does Europe, and they're already being dragged down, but they don't want to go full spiral with the rest of the EU down. So at least 3 times in the last week, the Kiev regime has targeted the Druzhba pipeline. The pipeline runs through their territory, right? So they are able to target it anywhere, really. They've been targeting it in Russia, right? Just across the border. And the damage that has been done, Russia has been able to fix in from several hours to a day or two, right? So, they've been able to do it thus far. But the Kiev regime is making a point that they can shut this off whenever they want to. They could always destroy it on their own territory, and then there's nothing Russia could do about it. They aren't outright admitting that they're doing it, right? They're leaving this ambiguity, but Zelensky is making, shall we say, snide comments about it. Druzhba means friendship, right? In Russian, it's the friendship pipeline. So Zelensky has been saying that our friendship depends on this, right? Depends on Hungarian support for us. And if Hungary wants friendship, there are things they must do, right? I mean, they're having a great deal of fun with this. Today, the Ukrainian, the Kiev regime's foreign minister, replied, "How shameless to post this after a brutal attack by terrorist state Russia." Peter, if replying to an ongoing conversation with the Hungarian foreign minister, Peter, if the Russian pipeline is more important to you than the Ukrainian children killed by Russia this morning, blah, blah, blah. And the Hungarian foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó, replied, "This is not our war. We are not responsible for it. We did not launch it. We have not been participating in it. Stop provoking us, stop risking our energy security, and stop making efforts to drag us into your war!" Exclamation point, right? So this is obviously an ongoing. And here's the thing. Hungary is desisting from cutting off electricity to the Kiev regime in Ukraine in response, which would, be the quid pro quo thing to do. You cut off our energy security, well, then we'll cut off the energy we supply to you. But they have, withheld from that thus far. They say because they don't, want to make the Ukrainian people suffer for the crimes of its government, right? And again, they specifically mention children because you always have to mention children in political rhetoric, right? It helps with your case every time, according to some people. The poor children.
Von der Leyen, it's all about the children.
Yeah. But I think it's more to do probably with some kind of deal that was reached with Brussels and NATO. And so Hungary is at the squeeze. And obviously, this is happening with Brussels approval, right? There's no secret that they want to get rid of Viktor Orban. They are working on the ground in what are essentially regime change operations, right? Trying to support and funnel money and organization into the political opposition in Hungary. Now, Viktor Orban still has, I think, a clear majority, but that majority is getting smaller. And there's a lot of pressure on the Hungarian government from, everyone else in Europe except for Slovakia at this point. These two hanging together. So if energy prices are forced to rise substantially over all of this, there's a danger that the Hungarian people's anger could be wrongly directed at Viktor Orban, right? So I mean, it's not really his fault though, because if he accedes to their demands, well, then they'll pay the higher energy price anyway, right? It just won't be, because it will be by choice instead of direct action by the Kiev regime with the support of Brussels. But this is, beating Hungary and Slovakia into line. That's what this is.
Yeah, that was the plan with Russia. We're going to make Russia suffer economically, and then they'll rise up and overthrow Putin. That's the game. Speaking of which, since we're on economic, before we move to other important topics, Germany, France, and the UK.
Yeah.
They're pretty much saying two things. Number one, we got to keep giving money to Ukraine. Number two, well, as for our citizens, things ain't gonna work out so well for them. Mark.
Yeah. So economists in the UK and France, and they've been doing the same thing in Germany for some time, are really ringing the alarm bells that they are facing a fiscal collapse. That they just they have increasing budget deficits. They're already deeply in debt, and the spending plans they have, primarily due to high energy costs because they've cut themselves off from Russian energy, and funding the Kiev regime, both economically and militarily, is just draining everything from these countries. And you're right, they obviously, whether we're talking Starmer or Macron or Merz, all of them are putting this geopolitical conflict over the living standards of their own people, and which is astonishing considering, of course, that they're not, supposedly directly involved in this conflict. And Ukraine is not a member of NATO and so forth. But it's geopolitics. NATO has pissed all over Ukraine like a dog marking its territory, and they're simply not willing to give it up, or even to accept it going back into neutrality, which it constitutionally had before the Westpac Maidan Putsch in 2014. But they're facing such a fiscal situation that economists are warning that in order to prevent a collapse, that the UK may have to go begging hat in hand again, and France as well, to the IMF to get stabilization loans, something that hasn't happened since the 1970s. And those loans, of course, will just add more debt already onto the debt that already exists. And it's just amazing. All of these three leaders are obviously far more focused on foreign policy and a proxy war on Russia than they are on their own economies and their own people. And Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, despite campaigning just for the office just a couple of months ago on quite different grounds, he was claiming he was the one to rebuild the German economy. Now he's saying, he said it outright, the German welfare state, right, the support system for its people that has existed for decades now, right, is no longer viable. It's no longer financially possible because Russia, right? I mean, that is literally the argument, because of our fight with Russia. It's not even about Ukraine. That's the thing. Ukraine is just a proxy. It's not to save Ukraine. It's to continue the geopolitical fight with Russia on behalf largely of the United States, of course, with this new, division of labor idea. where the U.S. is trying to slide off and focus on China and leaving Israel to take on Iran and Europe to take on Russia. And so effectively, what Merz is saying to the German people is we need to transfer Germany from a welfare state, right? Which the word sometimes has a bad political connotation in the United States, which is unfortunate because they're heartless capitalists. But it generally means, for the good of all, right? A strong public support system. He said,
I like the term a strong social safety net.
Yeah, a
You
strong
can get health
yeah,
care, you can get an education, you can afford to live, and you can actually live because you have health care coverage.
Yeah, I mean, it's mostly, of course, education and healthcare. I mean, those are the two biggest components of it. Things that most Americans say they want. But Merz is outright saying we need to transfer Germany from a welfare state into a warfare state, and he has promised that under him, Germany will become the largest and most powerful military in Europe.
If I may comment on that, Mark.
Yeah.
Here's the problem. Okay, I understand, Führer Merz wants to go back to the halcyon days of the late 1930s. Fair enough. I may not agree with it, that's what he wants to do. At a time when their industry is actually decreasing rather than increasing. And it's so corrupt that if the money came in to do that anyway, it would all just get laundered and stolen. I mean, even for that, I would be like horrified at the idea of Germany rearming, except that it's so corrupt, broken, and impoverished. They may have the motivation to do that. They don't have the political, intellectual, or physical infrastructure to accomplish that, no matter how bad they want it. Do you think I'm wrong?
No, I think you're exactly right. All right. So first of all, in terms of its existing military industrial complex, it is severely deteriorated, and it will require time and large infusements of capital, right? Because, it's not just making artillery shells, right? You need a whole supply chain going down to cotton padding that goes in the artillery shell that has to be imported, to all the components of explosive powder, which all of Europe is short on, and everything. So I mean, you're going to be competing for a whole supply chain of things that you have to build up. It's a lot more complicated than just building a factory for artillery shells. Secondly, Merz is quite clear that while he wants to build up the German military, the priority right now is transferring most of what they make to Ukraine. Now, of course, most of that is immediately going to be wasted, right? Is going to be destroyed very, very, very quickly, and it won't make Germany any stronger. But there's also the fact that building, industry in these terms, the reason German industry is collapsing is because of the high energy costs, right? The self-imposed by cutting themselves off from cheap, reliable Russian energy. So that means that the cost of making all of these weapons is going to be astronomically high. So the already high investment to rebuild a military industrial complex is doubly going to be plagued by the high energy costs involved in the production itself. And because of the immediate need, which is providing Ukraine, and the what would be medium long term of trying to rebuild the industry, it's quite clear that most of this is not going to actually be built by Germany anyway, which you could argue it's money going into the German economy. They're actually going to end up buying American weapons. That's actually what is quite clear. So the Americans are quite happy about that, right? The U.S. military industrial complex is, evil laugh. So I mean, Germany they've sacrificed their industry, they sacrificed their energy, their utility bills are just going through the roof for the citizens. And on top of it, now they're just transferring more money to America for Ukraine on top of everything else. The German people do not support this. The polls are quite clear about this. Now, the problem is that one, the Chancellor Merz's Christian Democrats in Germany are in a very loose and fragile alliance, political alliance to have a majority with the SPD, the outgoing SPD of Olaf Scholz. We haven't heard a whole lot from the SPD, supposedly a socialist-ish party, a left-ish party anyway. How they feel about just we're done with the welfare state. We need a warfare state. Because if they start saying going along with that, I mean, they're already, I mean, their support rating will go down into the single digits. Let's be clear. And right now, already the AfD, the alt-right party, the only substantial party that has been consistently against all of this for Ukraine, their numbers are the highest right now. I mean, they are the most popular party in the country by Germany's own polls. The problem is that no one else will, they have about 25 to 30% support. However, no one else will coalition with them following any future election, which means they would need not 30% to win the election. It's not enough to just have the highest number of votes. They would have to have over 50% to form a government just on their own, and that's not possible. So the German people politically, structurally, the way German politics works, are stuck with a foreign policy supported by the center-right, center-left shuffle that they don't want. And they're going far beyond this, right? Merz is talking war with Russia. They want to restart military conscription in Germany, which the young people of Germany are doubly against. So it's a very tough situation where the population doesn't support this, but doesn't have an immediate way to vote the bums out without supporting what is depicted in the German media as a far-right Nazi revanchist party, when the irony is that it's actually Merz that is being far more the far-right revanchist Nazi, particularly in terms of foreign policy right now. But that's German politics, and a lot of European countries are in the same bind. France is in essentially the same bind, with the National Rally Party being the one in opposition to all of this, but being prevented by every other party in the country from forming a government on their own. The one chink in this armor is it's amazingly looking like Nigel Farage's Reform Party in the UK may emerge substantially stronger than the existing Tory and New Labour parties, whose support has just completely collapsed. And I have to say, there's a lot of domestic political issues that I don't have much agreement with Nigel Farage on. That being said, he is, I think he would be, shall we say, Ukraine skeptic, US skeptic to a high degree on foreign policy, which, could potentially take the United Kingdom out of this whole thing, which could lead to a further collapse in European political support for Project Proxy War on Russia in Ukraine. It's tough to see where the leaves are going to, everything is going to fall at this point. But there's a I don't want to say a powder keg, because it's not like it's going to explode, but it's more like Europe is rotted. They're like a rotting floor in an old house, and you have to walk very carefully to make sure you don't go plummeting down into the basement through the floor.
I think it's going to be more like what was the sea exploration submarine that went down and squished with the rich people on it? You know, that's more like imploding. You know,
Implode.
yeah, I think that's it. It's more rather than boom, it's going to be squished. You know, wherein oh, the Russians are going to get us. Hey, what are those people doing building guillotines out there on the you know Champs and rather than they're so worried about the Ruskies are going to get them, the Chinese they're over here. God only knows what I don't know. The Hamas is going to get them, and they're going to
Yeah.
wake up one day, and the people are going to be like, "We're sick and tired of being sick and tired." And you ruling elite are the ones. Ultimately, oftentimes, it is the what do you call it? Internal uprising. That's what I think. That's their destiny. I see no way around it. Their destiny is internal uprising. Um, the Let 'em Eat Cake crew are back in charge. Anyway, let us move on to a bigger and more important things to the people that actually have an economic plan. President Putin is showing up in China. We got things going on there. We got North Korea. They're now in the economic, making their move economically, and they're aligning with people. And the North Korean leader's going to be there. And India. What's happening with the SEO? The and things like that going on in China from the view of Moscow. And when I'm in Moscow, I don't mean the Kremlin. I mean people like you.
Yeah. So there is next week a big Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting in China. It is a 4-day affair, and it is also coinciding with Beijing's Chinese World War II Victory Day, meaning specifically the victory over Japan as well. And as the Chinese President Xi Jinping came to Moscow in May for Russia's Victory Day, all of these leaders are now going to Beijing, you know, to pay tribute to China's role in World War II, something that is often forgotten. And China is the country that, in terms of cost, suffered more than any other country but the Soviet Union. They had tens of millions of dead. The Japanese were heinous in the atrocities and the massacres that they perpetrated in China. So it is very interesting to me the way that China and Russia are upholding the memory and shall we say the foreign policy lessons in the aftermath of World War II, while the Western powers seem intent on forgetting it. Right? I mean, the U.S. won't even.
How about reliving?
Yeah, reliving it. They don't even want to admit that they dropped, the atomic bombs on Japan. I mean, Japan has memorial situations where the Americans are there, and it's never even mentioned that it was the Americans who dropped the bomb. It's just like completely excised from the memory. And on top of this, right, they are literally supporting a regime that they helped bring to power in Ukraine that to a very substantial degree is built on and suffused with a Banderite fascist ideology, right? A return to the Ukrainian fascists of World War II who allied with Nazi Germany. It is, I mean, all Russia puts forward a bill, a resolution every year at the UN in the General Assembly to condemn Nazism and the shall we say the whitewashing, the apologizing, the rebirth of fascist ideologies and movements, right? And the destruction of that historical memory. And I mean, all you have to do is take a look at the countries, right? The countries that oppose the bill every year, US and Ukraine, and then all of Europe just abstains from it, right? It's not even quiet, right? It's all out in the open. And it's really no surprise. It was in the immediate aftermath of World War II, in Operation Red Sox, where the U.S., with the assistance of the United Kingdom and a few other powers, supported a attempted insertion of Ukrainian Nazis, right? People who had literally served just recently in the Waffen SS and other German military formations, right, from Ukraine, and essentially parachuted them into Ukraine with active, according to Politico, who reported on this a couple of years ago on Operation Red Sox, CIA led them on the ground in an attempt to start a fascist revolution in Ukraine, right? In the early 1950s. Of course, the Soviet Union knew everything about this, and it was a terrible failure. They were essentially greeted as they were landing. But the point is that all of this has happened before, and as far as the West is concerned, these are our Nazis, right? Just like they're willing to support right-wing death squads in South America, jihadists in Libya and Syria, and else, right-wing leaders guilty of atrocities everywhere. The Mujahideen in Afghanistan. There is no extremist that the U.S. won't use as a proxy to meet their geopolitical goals. I mean, we've just seen how many European leaders embrace in Syria, al-Julani, the new leader of Syria, who was literally the leader at one point of both Al-Qaeda and at another time of ISIS in Syria, right, in the last decade. So it shouldn't come as a surprise that they're perfectly willing to use, neo-Nazis or if you're really old school Nazis against Russia if that's what makes the most convenience, and that's what's going on. And it's kind of shocking that the one side of the world is shall we say, properly remembering and honoring World War II and the losses, on the other side is playing with the very forces that were responsible for it once again in the world as tools. Now, I think there's going to be a lot more going on in China than just, shall we say, an SCO presidential meeting and this, commemoration of China's role, on this 80th anniversary. This is going to be a big geopolitical meeting, essentially. It's going to go far beyond just the normal business of the SCO, because the whole world is now under threat, and BRICS in particular is under threat from Trump's, war of tariffs and attempt to force the continued use of the dollar on the rest of the world, and these new tariffs, these punitive tariffs being imposed on India. So Modi is going, the leader of the prime minister of India, and this will be his first trip to China in 7 years. Right? There have been very tense geopolitical relations between India and China over the last few years, but suddenly there's all these improvements, right? Because essentially the U.S. is pushing India back into the arms of China and Russia in the SCO, and BRICS and other multilateral institutions in Eurasia, because the U.S. is attempting to dictate the economic and foreign policy of India, and India's not having anything to do with it. And they've decided that India must be punished, and India, is I think having a where the US is having a masks off moment, and India's like, oh my God, we were crawling into bed with that.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think it's a good thing, paradoxically, that the US is going after India. India always, they were trying to do the Erdogan thing. There's so many of these leaders. It's like, okay, we'll be friends with the US and with the Russia and with China and all that stuff. And they're learning that that's not the way the US plays games.
Yeah.
It's either, first of all, you're not going to be independent, you're not going to be sovereign. You're going to do what you're told. And if you don't, well, then you are an enemy. I've said this for years. Yeah. US empire sees two kind of countries that we have taken over and we completely control and dominate and conquered, and countries that we intend to conquer. That's the only two categories. Yeah. And if you're not fully and wholly conquered, then you are an enemy who must be fully and wholly conquered. Good, because I think India is figuring this out. And which also, if in fact, which they figured it out, that means the only way they survive is to integrate themselves into the forces that have said, we're not going to be conquered. I heard someone say there's strength in numbers or something from India, but it's a recognition that there is, which is why they really hate China and Russia, because there is an alternative economic infrastructure. Granted, still maybe in its infancy, but it's built on powerful nodes, and it's being built. And I think India's like, well, you know what? We tried to play ball with these guys, but now we got no choice. They're just going to crush us.
Yeah, India has tried to be neutral, right? They've tried not to choose sides. They've tried to, but the US just isn't having any of that, right? You're either with us or you're against us. And it's really hilarious. Europe, right, to a large, continues to buy energy from Russia, right? LNG, other things. Some countries have exemptions, and the US continues to buy uranium, but they punish India. And it's interesting. They punish not Russia itself, right? They're not putting these 50% tariffs on Russia. I mean, there's not much business. So, I mean, it would mostly be symbolic anyway. But China buys even more energy from Russia than India does, of course. Together, they're purchasing something like 80% of Russian energy at this point. So it is very substantial. But China's buying more. But the US just essentially lost a trade war with China. And so they can't get back into that. So essentially, India is being punished because they're weak, because they can be. And India's just discovered that this whole sitting on the fence thing, it barely worked with the non-alignment movement in the Cold War. In this new Cold War, this new struggle for global order, the US isn't even accepting of that. So they've tried to, sit on both sides of the fence, and it hasn't worked for them. And now, I mean, these threats are it's not really just, it's the hubris with which it is delivered that I think matters just as much as well. We have reports, right, coming out of the Western media that Trump has tried to call Modi 4 times in the last couple of weeks, and Modi won't even pick up the phone. He's that pissed at Trump. When it was first announced that India would put, first of all, that the U.S. would put, first of all, 25% tariffs on India, just because that's part of Trump's new tariff war on the world, but then an additional 25% because India won't stop trading with Russia as punitive. My wife's, did you hear about these tariffs? And I'm like, that's great. And she's like, what? How can you say that? I'm like, because this is going to be it's far more than a straw, of course, but the straw that breaks the camel's back, and India will have to, choose a side over this. And do you choose the side that is punishing you for not doing what you said, or do you choose the rebels against the hegemon, right? That were trying to fashion a new order, not to attack the U.S., but simply to try to live without it, because we just don't want anything to do with it. You just leave us alone. That's the idea. But the U.S. isn't having any of that either, and Trump has made quite clear his hostility to BRICS, even though BRICS isn't attempting to create an alternative currency, an alternative global reserve currency. They're just trying to help their members trade with each other with their own currencies, right? And what is essentially a barter system, so they don't have to use the dollar. But if you're not using the dollar, then you're not under that type of U.S. control and leverage, and that's not to be tolerated, right? You have to accept your economic control. You have to continue using the dollar. That's what the U.S. is saying. And if you don't, we'll destroy your economy.
Good. And now I think India's in a situation where, as the old saying goes, when somebody tells you who they are, believe them. I think that's where India doesn't have a choice now but to believe them. They're like, well, we told you who we were. You wouldn't believe us. Now we've shown you who we are. Will you believe us now? And luckily for India, yes, will they take a hurt? Yes, but they haven't increased their dependence to a point where they'll be wiped out and destroyed. And ultimately, now I think China's close by. Russia's right there. The good thing about India is where they're situated. Everything they need to be successful is nearby. U.S. is a long ways away. Yes, is it a big, they can sell a lot of stuff, fair enough. But at some point, they're going to use that to crush you. So I think it's good to see India going in the direction that they're going for India. Not that I'm a fan of Modi for a lot of reasons, but he ain't going to be in charge forever. He's doing what he's got to do. Good things are going on with them. I'm glad to see North Korea there too. I think they're, the people there have suffered a lot, and it's time for the North Korean people to see opportunities. Now, let me ask you this: the big one, what's happening on the battlefield? Because that drives everything, Mark.
Yeah. So right now there is very intense fighting going on around Pokrovsk, which this small city in south central Donbass that was previously a logistics and transportation center for the Kiev regime. It's not anymore. It is operationally encircled, right? All the supply lines going into it are increasingly under direct Russian control, and the handful that aren't are under artillery and drone fire. And Russia, in the last 2 weeks, has made a deep penetration. They have essentially put Pokrovsk into pinchers with deep flanking to both sides of the city, so they can effectively attack it from the opposite side, from the north and the west, right? From the other side. And they made a really deep penetration to the north and the west of Pokrovsk, where they broke through the Kiev regime defensive lines in a big way. And everything really over the last 2 weeks has been a increasingly street building to building fighting in Pokrovsk itself, and extremely intense fighting to try. The Kiev regimes have thrown counterattack after counterattack, trying to drive back this Russian penetration to the north and west of Pokrovsk, and they've just not been successful, and they're exhausting their forces. And what's more than that, in order to try to staunch this wound, they don't have reserves, so they had to pull troops from other areas along the contact line, including Konstantinovka, which is the southernmost position of the Kiev regime's last defensive line. And that has led to Russian forces now fighting in Konstantinovka itself. And there's other Kiev regime holdouts in the Donbass and South Kharkov region Seversk, Kupiansk, and Liman. All of these cities together are facing encirclement right now, right? They're being just drowned in the contact line. And the Kiev regime is just in a position where they can't defend everywhere effectively. They don't have the manpower for it. They don't have the military resources. And they're still trying to defend everywhere. And it's leading to, constriction, right? Think of the Russian forces like a python that is, slowly constricting and strangling the life out of these Kiev regime, last positions in the Donbass region in the east here. And it's just getting really desperate. The fighting is intense. They're not, shall we say, going gently into that good night in the Donbass area. They're give them credit, right? Whether the motivation of the soldiers is they're forced to be there, or the Banderite forces who are within the Kiev regime's military forces that are ideological, but they're fighting, and they're fighting hard. They're just completely outmatched in terms of everything: drones, artillery, air power, and manpower. Certainly, both in quality and quantity. And Russia does have to go building to building, right, room to room, and clear out everything, and that is a time-consuming and an onerous task, particularly when Russia is still using their attrition strategy, so that they suffer very light casualties while the Kiev regime's casualties are maximized, right? It's still not as fast as many people would like, but U.S. Pentagon leaders have referred to the Russian advance as a lava flow, right? Slow, but unstoppable and inexorable, right? There's just nothing you can do about it, and that continues. And there's a question: how much longer can the Kiev regime military stand up under this pressure? Well, they're still fighting, but they're just not able to stop. At best, they can slow down the Russian forces in some areas for a period of time. That is all they have shown that they're capable of all this summer. They have not been capable of any type of summer offensive like last year in the late summer, early autumn. They attempted in the Kursk region. They've had some kind of crazy Hail Mary small attempts at incursions into the Bryansk region in the north and Belgorod region, but they've all failed. Kind of miserably. Russian forces knew about them and crushed them beforehand. So again, what is really coming due right now is the butcher's bill, the 3-year butcher's bill for Russia's war of attrition is starting to come due. And the Kiev regime's military is just not able to, continue to resist and defend that the way they were. And Russia is applying this constant pressure everywhere along the contact line, all at the same time. So they're not just moving on one city now, they're moving on, 10, a dozen cities, and conscripting them all in the same way.
Let me ask you this. Where do the supplies come from? I mean, I'm looking now. They're probably is that up there, Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, right? Who controls that?
Russia's controlled that since 2023.
And then they've got Bakhmut. What about Sloviansk?
Yeah, Slavyansk and so the last Kiev regime's defensive line, right, a tight urban agglomeration, is considered to be Slavyansk, Kramatorsk, and Konstantinovka, right?
Okay,
running from north to south, and those are still held by by the Kiev regime. Although Konstantinovka, there's already street to street fighting going on, and they're facing encirclement. So kind of the southernmost position that the Kiev regime has right now is Pokrovsk, right? Pokrovsk and Mirnograd, they're together. Mirnograd is actually smaller, despite the wrong lettering there on the map. In the north of the Donbass region, the last holdout, also facing a very severe encirclement, very critical situation. In the north of the Donbass is Seversk, right? That's to the north of Bakhmut. And so it's Seversk and Pokrovsk, and then these last three settlements in the defensive line. And that's really all the significant positions that the Kiev regime holds in the Donbass region. And, they're fighting for it. It would make military sense to withdraw their forces from Seversk and Pokrovsk and probably Konstantinovka at this point, and retreat to better defended positions, right, where they're not facing encirclement. But
do they have Druzhkovka? They still have that?
Do they have what?
That between it looks like Druzhkovka. It's between Kramatorsk and
it's all part. Yeah, that's all part of the urban agglomeration.
Okay,
but the print there is giving it a bigger sense. It's really a smaller tier city than Kramatorsk or Slavyansk. It's more of a big town.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so that line there from Sloviansk to Konstantinovka, and it's a matter of time. We don't know when that line kind of falls. And Sloviansk is the one. What about Mykolaiv?
Yeah. So Russian forces are engaging there right now.
Okay. So it looks like go ahead.
The noose is tightening. Like you asked where they're getting their supplies from.
Yes.
The supplies that are still getting into, and again, they're under constant fire, so not many supplies are getting in Pokrovsk is coming from the Dnepropetrovsk region, right? That's where it's coming from right now. And we know that Russian forces elsewhere are moving into the Dnepropetrovsk region to the south of Pokrovsk as well. So, it's conscripting everywhere along the front line at the same time.
Yeah, I see that M30 big highway. Is that the one that comes from?
Yes.
That goes through Pavlograd?
Yes.
Well, I imagine that's a pretty dangerous highway if you're Ukrainian.
What is going to be very interesting here is sometime probably in the first half of next year, Russia is going to completely have taken the Donbass, right? They'll have finished Seversk and Pokrovsk probably, before the new year, and then they'll move on the last defensive line, Slavyansk and Kramatorsk, in the first half of next year. And then it's a different ball game because the rest of Ukraine, right, moving to the west of the Donbass, moving into Dnepropetrovsk and elsewhere, it's a very different geography. It's a very different topography because there it becomes steppe. It's not the hilly, forested Donbass, and there's also not the tight urban settlements that run into each other with a lot of old Soviet heavy-duty factories with bomb shelters that just made excellent foundations for fortifications and the like. All of that is gone. That was a feature of the Donbass. And once you move out of the Donbass and further west, like into Dnepropetrovsk, then you have spaced out small settlements without these, industrial scale, industrial capable defenses and the like. And the terrain is flat. And that really plays to the advantage of someone who has air power and, maneuver power, overmatch like the Russians do. So it's kind of a desperate last stand here. After the Donbass, these last holdouts in the Donbass fall, right? In the next 6-8 months, then it's really a whole new ball game. Then we're probably going to move into more of a maneuver war phase, simply because the terrain will change, the defenses will be considerably less significant than they were. And the Kiev regime will probably be facing a critical manpower situation because they'll spend everything they can trying to hold on to these last few settlements in the Donbass, to the bitter end, because Zelensky just doesn't accept the idea of a tactical withdrawal to save forces and let them fight in a better defensive position for whatever political, narrative, ideological reasons. He just refuses to allow any retreat, and it means that they seem to hang on longer, but of course it's ultimately leading to a quicker final destruction of the Kiev regime's military, sustainability.
Now, it seems to me at that point, and this is a point I've always made. At that point, there's a lot of troops in this, kind of very, very highly populated area. Okay.
Yes.
At that point, at some point when things really go bad, they're going to have to withdraw a lot of troops, probably, in some kind of a hurry, and head for wherever, who knows, Dnipro, Kharkov, wherever.
We say that, but they've never withdrawn forces before. They didn't from Avdiivka, they didn't from Lysychansk, they didn't from Mariupol. They forced them, and that's what they're telling the forces in Seversk and Pokrovsk right now. You must stay and fight to the end, to the death.
So they're just going to all die there. Because I thought at that point, if you get withdrawing troops, they're going to be naked out in the open. But what you're saying is, they'll just fight there. And then, then they'll really be in deep and serious trouble, because all of those troops that could potentially reinforce other areas won't be available. And if you're somewhere else now, you're in a world of hurt, because there's no reinforcements coming from anywhere.
Not to mention the morale when you see these cities fall and all of these troops either killed or captured as POWs. And, that's really the best thing that can happen to them, because they'll actually live. But it's going to lead to increasing, not only are they losing their best troops they have left, which isn't many at this point, but everyone else will suffer huge morale problems, because they'll see that this regime just did nothing to get these people out of a bad situation that they couldn't win in, that they threw their lives away for what? Headlines, for political reasons, when military sense says otherwise.
Yeah. I'm with you. Well, a lot of things are going to happen between then and now. We shall see. Now, meanwhile, we still got the Trump team, saying all these things about wanting to get out. I believe that Trump and his vice president, if they had their choice, they'd get out, but they're trapped in so many ways. They want to get out on their own terms, which ain't going to happen. That's not the way losing wars work. You know what I mean? You lose a war, you don't get to choose the terms. And they just, they can't grasp that, because, hey, this is the U.S., American exceptionalism. We always choose the terms. Win or lose, we always win, right? Here's the thing I wanted to ask you about. And we discussed this. Okay, we won out. And Trump said recently, you don't pick fights with countries bigger than you are. Basically, Trump has admitted to the rest again. Ukraine can't win this. He said it. You can't win. All right. But now they're like, yes, they can't win. They're losing, blah, blah, blah. But we're going to send them 3,000 cruise missiles or something. Now, granted,
3,500.
Yeah, they got like a 280 mile range. So they're not exactly the super long range. But you're going to send them 3,000 more missiles to keep this thing going. So, they're going to get them as close as they can to the Russian border. They're going to attack civilian targets, things of that nature. It's not going to make a difference. Anyway, your thoughts on this whole foolishness?
The U.S., may want out of this, but they want out of this on their terms. They're trying to raise the costs for Russia to get them to accept an ending of the conflict on terms more that the U.S. is willing to accept than what Russia is demanding. That's the game, right? You need to escalate to de-escalate, which is the neocon line. Of course, it's not going to work. And it seems Trump is going to go right down the sunk cost fallacy that the Biden administration did, right? Because they're falling back on sanctions and weapons because Russia is winning and they're dictating the terms and they're not accepting the US terms. And Trump may want out of this, but not on Russian terms. He can't politically afford it, right? The US geopolitically can't afford it. So the war goes on. I mean, that's essentially what it is. But
one other thing before we go, since we're just about out of time. All of this talk about frozen Russian assets, here's what I think. They already stole a lot of them in Europe. And one of the fears amongst many is that what happens if this thing somehow, let's just say for the sake of argument, one of their fears, not that it's going to happen, if there was a deal and Trump said, okay, the Americans are going to, or the Russians are good. This would be the worst. The Russians have agreed some kind of a deal where they're investing some of them in America, or they're using this, or blah, 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 blah. Produce the Russian assets. I think they've always stolen a lot of them, and they won't admit it, and they can't produce. They'll never be able to produce them. That they may be even living off of them to some extent.
Yeah, well, they're certainly, transferring the receipts of the interest, which is, already theft, to the Kiev regime, right? Billions of dollars at this point. But yeah, it's quite clear they never intend to return this money to Russia, right? It will be frozen, stolen, whatever. Russia's never going to get that money back. And I think the Kremlin has already accepted that, and it should just inform Russia going forward of economically getting back into bed with the West at the end of this, assuming there is an end to this in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. Like, there's reports that Exxon is in secret deals to try to get back in with Rosneft. And I'd be like, get back into bed with an American business, go pound sand, right? I mean, get out of here. But I guess there's some diplomatic game going on. So.
Yeah, I think that's about that's a game going on. Even the fact that they're in talks, I'll believe it when I see it. It's like Elliot Abrams when they ask him, "Hey, what's going on with the Chevron or whoever working in Venezuela?" And he says, "Well, that's so." Literally, this is what Elliot Abrams said. He said, "Well, that's so when we overthrow the regime, will already have started, changing their oil stuff over to us. So it's a good thing that we're doing that. And it's preparation for regime change." So they're like, yes, we're going to work with you now. Why? So when we overthrow your government, it'll be a lot easier for us to start. We'll already have started taking your oil. We're beginning taking your oil now, so that when we finally are able to overthrow your government, we'll be already, it'll be a quick. You can't do business with these people. Mark Sleboda, first of all, let's get to the important stuff before we go. We must, here we go. Let's go here. We got to let you know where you can find all of Mark Sleboda's good works, and it is easy. You go to boosty.to/therealpolitik. That's right. We're up to 175 subscribers. We're pushing for 200. Let's see. We've only gotten 15 since our last show. We were at 160. So we need 25. I think we can do it. It's September. Kids are going back to school. Everybody's excited. 25 more subscribers. The Real Politik with Mark Sleboda. Mark, thanks a lot. Certainly appreciate it. And anything that you can tell people that they don't already know about your Boosty page?
Yeah, it's a sanctions-proof Patreon, essentially, right? That's what it is. That's why I'm there, because it's not subject to sanctions. So people can support me there, but also lots of exclusive content. You get a in focus video, weekly question and answer where I take your questions, and a week in review every week. So at least 3 hours of exclusive content right there every week, and you get access to a Discord channel, a private Discord channel where I talk to you in person, interviews, that sort of thing, and at higher levels of support. You can choose what videos I make. So,
wow.
You put you in charge.
Excellent. Everybody, so join. Thanks a lot, Mark. Certainly appreciate it, everyone. And follow me on Rockfinch and Rumble and Telegram, all that stuff. If you can, thanks to all of my Patreon people and my Buy Me a Coffee people. You keep the channel going. If you can afford to, support the channel. Even if you can't, the most important thing you can do is share this on all your social media platforms. We're out.
Thanks.